It's kind of the perfect story at the right time for right-wing media too. Fox has really done a lot to turn down the volume on Epstein. Then comes along Sydney Sweeney in jeans, and the network is just absolutely thrilled to run this as a story. Welcome to Power Lines. I'm John Passantino.
And I'm Oliver Darcy.
Today we're discussing MSNBC staffers packing it up at 30 Rock as they prepare to exit the Peacock, new backlash against Brendan Carr after approving the Paramount merger, the Sydney Sweeney jeans ad that has sparked a full-blown culture war. But first, the right-wing backlash against the New York Times over an update to its front-page story on starvation in Gaza. So Oliver, this week at the New York Times, we saw some actually pretty incredible imagery that we woke up to. Some demonstrators or graffiti artists showed up in front of the New York Times and scrawled, "New York Times lies, Gaza dies," on its offices. And they tossed paint on the building, blood red color. That Starbucks that's located next door there in Times Square was also sort of trashed outside. It was a pretty sort of uncomfortable scene, I can imagine, especially if you're a staffer. But this is coming after the New York Times wrote this really incredible, explosive story. It was a front page piece in A1 last Friday that detailed the starvation crisis that's taking place in Gaza as Hamas and Israel's war drags on. This war has been going on for quite some time now. But the Times, a few days later, early this week, published an update, and they flagged it on social media by posting this updated statement to X, Elon Musk's platform. And that resulted in really a wave of backlash, primarily from the right. And that video, that screenshotted post, that tweet, now has more than 13 million views on it. It's become the subject of, Fox News segments. But what is going on here? What happened here? Why did this story days later get an update? And what do you think this means?
Well, it is so the accompanying the story on the front page last Friday on the New York Times was a picture of an emaciated child who is suffering of starvation. And it was a striking image. I think that honestly, even if you didn't read the story, the image, as they say, spoke 1,000 words. And it captivated, the country, seeing this starving child on the front page of the New York Times next to a headline, a pretty striking headline that says Gazans are dying of starvation. And so it made a lot of waves when it was published. The update that you're referring to, they came back and they updated the story and said that the child that was pictured on the front page of the New York Times had a medical condition outside starvation that had made it difficult, I guess, to stunted the muscle and brain development of this child. That said, the New York Times noted that this child is still suffering of severe starvation. And what you saw this week, though, is people who want to discredit the broader narrative, which we know is true, that there is a starvation crisis happening in Gaza, say, look, the New York Times printed Hamas propaganda. This child was so thin and emaciated, not because of the starvation, but because of this pre-medical condition. And they really used it or attempted to use it to discredit the entire Times story, which was very detailed, very well reported, and it contained other images. And, and again, this is many news organizations have covered this now. There is a hunger crisis in Gaza, but it's sort of similar to what we've seen throughout the war, where people with agendas look for the tiny, the weakest link in the chain, and they use that to try to discredit the broader narrative, the broader story, regardless of whether that's true. And, inside the New York Times, this has led to some frustration and dismay because in the eyes of leadership, they were doing the right thing, which was publishing on their own accord a transparent update. And instead of being, I don't think anyone gets rewarded for doing the right thing these days, but instead of being, people saying, well, look how transparent the New York Times is with their reporting and lauding the newspaper for publishing that update, you just see relentless attacks, including from the former prime minister of Israel, saying that this was blood libel. And you saw Fox News segments saying, New York Times publishes correction on story, even though there was no correction. This was just an update. But inside the Times, I think there's a great deal of frustration about this, and they feel that no matter what they do here, they are just getting pummeled by critics.
Yeah, I noticed when I was reading up on what happened here and the reaction to it online, many of the stories, including what we saw on Fox, called this a story correction. But that's not even what happened here. They appended like an editor's note at the bottom of the piece. And I mean, largely read through the before and after version here. We're looking at largely the same story. Just one of the children that was featured in the piece also had a pre-existing medical condition. We were talking about this, before we started the show. And it's hard to imagine if you were born right now in Gaza under these extraordinary circumstances in the last year that any sort of medical issue, I mean, I'm a dad with young children, that any sort of medical condition for a newborn is going to get proper treatment. It's going to be a very uphill climb. So you can only imagine if you compound that with a blockade, which has prevented children from being able to access needed food, medicine, et cetera. That's just going to exacerbate this situation. But the backlash here coming from predominantly the right has been really, I think, unusually large. Like this is like a big wave. And it seems like the idea here is like you can do two things at once. You can discredit the mainstream press, the lying New York slimes. We can destroy them. And at the same time, also, we can discredit this whole narrative that Israel is doing anything wrong here in this war, that there's an actual hunger crisis, that there's potentially, we're on the brink of a famine with, young children who are in it, like, let's be honest, are innocent in this war. And I think both sides completely agree with that viewpoint. But it's a way to say that this issue is one that is manufactured by the mainstream press. And we know that because on the other end of this is Hamas. And Hamas is, using its propaganda forces to infect the American mainstream press, to manipulate the American public. And my view from reading this is that they are largely trying to convince people not to believe your own eyes, that there's something more going on here. You are still somehow being lied to. And as the Times, you did some fantastic reporting on this. As the Times said, their own reporters who are in this incredibly dangerous war zone are risking their lives to try to even bring this reporting out of there. I mean, I think it's pretty widely known now that Israel is not really allowing anyone from the media to go in here and to offer any sort of protection that, if you go over here and you can interview folks, we're not going to suddenly drop bombs. Our tanks are not going to go off. You're not going to see us open fire like we've seen in food lines repeatedly in recent days with dozens of people dying in them. So the Times is literally risking their lives having staff in there to bring these stories out, only to now have a transparent update saying one of the kids in here, actually, we learned a little bit more about them, and to be, and for that to be weaponized against them and for the press at large.
But also, the child that was featured is suffering of severe starvation. So whether they have a medical condition that impacts them outside the starvation, that honestly arguably makes it worse, that kids who have medical conditions are literally starving. And so, I don't really understand the criticism of this as if, it reminds me of COVID. You remember during COVID when people were dying, and then again, on the right, generally, they were saying, well, they weren't dying of COVID. They had those medical preconditions, right? That's why they died. And so the million people, I guess, that died because, or whatever the number was, the scores of people who died because of a medical precondition that was exacerbated by COVID apparently don't count as like, COVID deaths, which is absurd. And it seems similar to the argument that's being made here that, oh, well, this kid is starving, but actually the reason, he's in such bad medical condition is because of that medical precondition, not the starvation. The kid is still suffering severe starvation. The medical clinic that's treating him has said as much, and the New York Times has verified it with his doctor. And so the criticism here, it feels like it's largely in bad faith. And you're seeing the typical people who engage in bad faith commentary, like CNN's Scott Jennings, attack the New York Times as a propaganda organ, I guess, of Hamas. And you're seeing, a very, I think, I don't know. It just feels like it's these people are not usually engaged in an honest commentary, and now they're seizing on this to sow doubt about a thing that we know is very true, that people are starving and it's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Yeah, it's a great narrative for the right, which has always railed against the mainstream media, quote unquote, the press, to say that they're lying to you. And here we are, here's an update, and framing that as if they're walking back something, tail between their legs. The thing that I think is interesting here is that in recent days, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, has denied that there is this brink of famine, starvation, crisis in Gaza. But we saw Donald Trump come out and say that he's watched this footage on television, and you can't fake that. And it is real, and it is happening. And that I thought was really interesting, because that actually is what the Times is effectively reporting here as well, and producing photographs showing. But the base, the MAGA media base, is taking up the flag here to say, actually, this is BS, and there's a manipulation campaign that's underway here. So I have found that very interesting. But,
well, if you could say, pictures, as I say, pictures don't lie, right? You can see it with your own two eyes. It's not lying to you. So if you want to discredit what's the reality of what's happening on the ground, you have to discredit the photography coming out of there. And we know Donald Trump, for instance, is a very image-driven person, and I think there's been reports in the past that he's seen images and been taken aback by what's happened. And so it's not surprising, I guess, in this case, that he would also see these horrific images coming from Gaza and voice disagreement with Netanyahu. So the only alternative thing that, the only move here, if you want to discredit this reporting, is to discredit the photos. And I think that's what you're seeing here. And that photo in particular, I think, moved a lot of hearts and minds possibly, and woke people up to the humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza. And so you're seeing these activists now go after the New York Times. And it's, inside the Times, you can imagine how frustrating this might be, given that, I was talking to someone, and the photographer who took this photo in Gaza is struggling to get food himself. And so when you send people and you have people employed who are really doing the best they can under extraordinary circumstances, to then become the punching bag or the piñata of these, talking heads who are pushing obviously a clear agenda. That's an unfortunate reality of, I guess, today's information ecosystem. All right, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about MSNBC charting its new future as it breaks away from the Peacock nest at 30 Rock. Welcome back. So, Oliver, we're in the final days of MSNBC in the Peacock nest at 30 Rock. They're preparing to exit there as they spin off with Versant, their new break-off, spin-off company that is going to include all of the cable brands that NBC Universal decided they didn't want any more of. It's not part of its streaming future. But MSNBC has actually a pretty interesting path ahead. They're one of the rare news outlets that's actually hiring people, and they're staffing up because now they actually need a news gathering operation of their own. It seems like they're not going to be able to rely, like they have all this time, on the resources of NBC, which not only has a national news gathering operation, but also has the local affiliates from coast to coast, which
you and I, having worked in newsrooms for some time, understand how valuable it is to have staffers, reporters, eyes on the ground, photographers that you can deploy to scenes all over the place. This is quite a challenge, actually, to have a national news organization that's going to be doing this effectively all on its own. What's going on at MSNBC as they prepare for this new future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge, it's a very pivotal moment for MSNBC. I think the reality is also starting to set in over there that they are about to actually leave the NBC Universal family and chart their own course. And so you're seeing signs of that happening already. They announced, for instance, their big live event that's going to happen in October. Last year when it was announced, there are all these Peacock logos, surrounding the MSNBC logo, and it's all over the promotional material. This time, noticeably, there was no Peacock logo. It just had the naked MSNBC logo on its own. And I think that's, they're slowly peeling away from the NBC Universal branding and family. And the real thing that's going to happen is the physical move. So my understanding is in the next few weeks, the moving boxes are going to arrive at 30 Rock. They're going to start moving offices over into Times Square, their new temporary building, which they're referring to as summer camp, because they're only going to be there, I think, for about 18 months or so before their permanent offices are found and built. They're going to be, this week, they were supposed to get an email from, I guess, the facilities folks explaining how they can get new phones and new computers, because they have to, get new devices as they exit to the company. And so there's all this going on. I think the reality is starting to set in that they are going to be on their own. And it's a big moment for MSNBC because they have, as you mentioned, relied on the NBC news gathering operation, which is global. They have bureaus around the world there gathering news. They can bring on NBC News reporters. They can, they for a while had even NBC News journalists as anchors. They've moved away from that, but they've been very intertwined over the years, and now they're going to divorce. As with all divorces, it's not necessarily a clean split. Some people are taking sides and going to the MSNBC side. Some people are staying on the NBC side. This week, for instance, we saw the executive producer of the NBC Nightly News. It was announced that she's going to Versant to be the vice president of standards and really oversee CNBC and MSNBC in the standards departments. And so it's a bit chaotic over there. And I think people are realizing that they're going to have a big mountain to climb ahead of them, because not only are they going to have to figure out how to hire all these news gathering folks, they're hiring, I think, about 50 people right now for news gathering, but they're also going to have to contend with the decline of linear television, which is not going to reverse. And they're going to have to also contend with what everyone else is contending with, which is AI and the tech landscape just completely shaking things up for news organizations. So there's a lot on Rebecca Cutler's plate. Arguably, this is perhaps the most defining moment in MSNBC's nearly 3 decade long history that they've ever, traversed.
Yeah, I feel like they have smartly gotten into the live space before anyone else from the cable news, from the cable news lineup. Like, we don't see CNN live events.
Yeah, the Fox News has done a lot of live events with the Fox Nation.
Have they? Who are the hosts of that?
Oh yeah, they do the Fox Nation Awards.
That's
do a
right.
lot of,
I
do a lot
totally
of live
forgot
events.
about that.
Yeah, they do a lot.
Aren't they the Patriot Awards?
First, yeah, I forget what they're called, but they were first to that space. But they are. I mean, you have to give credit to MSNBC for starting to do these live events. I mean, the Brooklyn one they did last year was sold out. There were thousands of tickets sold out at pretty high costs. So, they are getting in the game. But I think, everyone has to be in this game at this point.
Yeah. And so Rebecca Cutler, who's the network boss over there at MSNBC now, it seems like she has her work cut out for her. What for the viewers who are like, they don't know where the network is broadcasting from, whether it be 30 Rock, Times Square. What do you think we're going to see in terms of changes on the air? Do you think that we'll watch and we'll turn on MSNBC and it will have a different perspective than it has over the last years? Or, I mean, my view here is that they would be crazy to alienate their existing audience. We reported this week that MSNBC's audience had actually held on a little better, even amid audience declines generally across the board in cable news. Their ship has been a little steadier, while CNN had fallen more precipitously, both in total and in the demo audience. And the same is true actually for Fox. So MSNBC seems to be sort of clawing in and holding on to its audience a little better. Their total audience was nearly doubled CNN's in prime time in the last ratings book. But do you think we'll see changes there as they spin away from NBC?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, we reported at the time that Mark Lazarus, who's going to be the head of MSNBC's new parent company, Versant, had indicated to people that he wanted, I think, a less combative MSNBC. And we did see some changes made where they removed Joy Reid. They made some other programming changes that were controversial, both internally and externally. I think they've moved past that at this point. So I can't imagine the MSNBC of today is going to look a lot different than the MSNBC of 6 months from now. I think that they're probably pretty happy with where MSNBC is. It would be surprising, I think, if they decided to go another direction, because they saw likely what happened with CNN. And when CNN changed its editorial tone, they lost audience as a result. So now that MSNBC is going to be a lot more vulnerable, it would be surprising, I think, for them to alienate their core viewership. They need those viewers actually buying tickets to the live events and, listening to Nicole Wallace's podcast. So I think you'll still see a similar tone from MSNBC.
Yeah, it seems like the smart move is to double down on your existing audience and to really make sure that they continue to tune in. And the Trump administration provides like the perfect environment for them to portray and market themselves as, as an important necessity to keep tuned into while the country goes through dramatic convulsions. The
question here is whether MSNBC is going to survive, though, long term, I think. I mean, the editorial tone might say the same, but can MSNBC survive the decline of linear television? Can they pivot their business fast enough to be a digital business, a live events business? Rebecca Cutler, the boss over there, she had a meeting recently with her top deputies and indicated to them they all need to have this transformational mindset, and the company cannot look the same 2 years from now as it does right now. And I think the clock is rapidly ticking for these linear television networks. They don't have the luxury of time. They have to move fast. And this is a big company. I mean, this is a company that makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and their revenue is going to continue declining. And how do you pay someone like Rachel Maddow, tens of millions of dollars a year if you don't have the underlying business to support that? And I think that's the question. What's going to happen with their business model? Can they retain talent as they start to shrink? Or does someone like Rachel start her own, Rachel Maddow network? Or does Chris Hayes start his own YouTube channel and podcast and start writing books? Can they retain these people as part of the MSNBC family as they try to navigate this changing business landscape? I think that's the real question. And that's what, if you're talking about viewers at home, are they going to see the same MSNBC a few years from now? I think they'll still see a progressive MSNBC, but are they going to have the same faces? Are they going to be able to retain that talent? That's the open question.
Right. And we've seen some of them who have departed start their own independent outlet, right? Mehdi Hassan, who departed MSNBC, start Zeteo and has done very well. I think we saw him break 1 million YouTube subscribers this week, which is quite a feat in itself. So there's real momentum in the independent space. I agree. So we will see. I'm very curious what that ends up looking like. So, but speaking of Comcast and NBC, Brendan Carr, that's Trump's FCC commissioner, sent another letter launching another investigation of his this week into NBC. And he has come under quite a bit of criticism in the last several months as he has launched investigations into ABC. And he quite infamously now held up the Paramount Skydance merger that has become this long tortured deal that is finally on the brink of actually being approved after he greenlit it from the FCC. But that has sparked a lot of questions about the FCC being, weaponized and politicized in the Trump era. This week, we saw the Freedom of the Press Foundation take some pretty extraordinary action. Take maybe a page actually out of Brendan's book here and send a letter to the DC bar arguing that Brendan, who is a lawyer, practicing lawyer himself, arguing that he is engaged in egregious misconduct. Oliver, you got a copy of this letter before anyone else from the Freedom of the Press Foundation. In it, they're saying that Trump's shakedown of Paramount could not have worked without a credible threat that the administration would not approve Paramount's merger with Skydance. So they're clearly connecting the dots here, saying that this has become like a weaponized, politicized agency. What are the ramifications here?
That's a good question. I don't know if there will be any. It's hard to imagine that the DC court, the disciplinary body here, is going to actually disbar Brendan Carr, which is what the Freedom of the Press Foundation is asking for. And they're saying there's plenty of evidence and reason to discipline Carr and to disbar him. Hard to imagine that they'll do that against the sitting FCC chairman, but I think it's quite incredible. They're basically, as you said, taking the tables and reversing them on Brendan Carr, and he's launched all these dubious, clearly politically motivated investigations into Trump's media critics, whether it's Paramount and CBS News or with Comcast and going after them, and because of NBC News' coverage, clearly it seems like, or Disney, all these companies, right? And so they are applying some pressure. I'm sure it's slightly annoying if you're Brendan Carr to now have to deal with this. And they're spotlighting the issue. Notably, though, Brendan Carr likes to text me generally late at night. And respond to a lot of these attacks or these criticisms that he gets, usually in a manner that's more befitting of like an internet troll. He often likes to respond in GIFs, that are satirical. In this case, I sent him a message on Monday evening, I think, when we reported this, and he never responded. He hasn't responded to this. So I generally assume when he does not respond, he's trying to, that's an intentional move on his behalf, and he's being careful. The only other time he didn't respond was to questions about the Paramount situation, and he was very careful, I think, about what he was saying there. So I can't imagine this is good news for him. And Freedom of the Press Foundation, we should say as well, has been sort of the only thorn in the side of Paramount and Brendan Carr, because they also have said they're going to file litigation, a shareholder lawsuit against Paramount for settling the $16 million lawsuit with 60 Minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it doesn't help that Carr has been public with his criticism of people like Stephen Colbert. And that's a pretty extraordinary place to be in as an administration official who is in a position to approve or disapprove of these deals, and coming out and saying, I think he sent a text to you, I think he also tweeted it, right? This attack on Stephen Colbert. He's not funny. His time is up. And it's hard to disconnect that viewpoint and making public statements from the reality that he's also in this position of authority. And so when Donald Trump now goes after Jimmy Kimmel and the comments that he makes on ABC, it's hard to see how Brendan Carr is also not receiving that message for when something might make its way to his desk from the ABC Disney Co. I'm very curious how this goes. We have seen other previous Trump administration officials over the years get disbarred over their actions during the Trump years. Rudy Giuliani famously was disbarred after some of his activities around the post January 6th time, the comments that he made on Fox and right-wing media about whether or not the 2020 election was a valid one. You saw that all that Dominion and Smartmatic case activity around that. I'm not sure they have as strong of a case here, but I do think that the action that the Freedom of the Press Foundation is taking here, both this and with the lawsuit threat over this, over this merger, calling parts of this a bribe to get the deal across the line, I do think is a very interesting story that can continue to develop here. Do you think that any of this ends up harming the Paramount Skydance deal? I mean, we're days away now from David Ellison taking over.
No, I can't imagine that it does. But we should say that the way Brendan Carr is behaving is so outrageous and so against precedent that, I've talked to former FCC chairs and commissioners, both Republicans and Democrats, and they typically never say anything about their successors. They don't want to interfere with them. They let them do their own thing. Both Republicans and Democrats, and they have broken their silence repeatedly, actually, and gone after Brendan Carr and said that he is not behaving consistent with the way an FCC chairman should. And Anna Gomez, who is the lone Democrat on the FCC right now, she's a commissioner. And she has a decent, I guess, personal relationship with Brendan Carr, but she has said that the FCC has basically become an instrument of censorship being wielded by Donald Trump. And so you're right, when Donald Trump makes threats now against Jimmy Kimmel and other late night hosts, Jimmy Fallon, I think as well, you do wonder what message is being sent to Brendan Carr. And it doesn't take much apparently for him to launch these investigations. He just sort of he just launches them, and I think these companies are really they're not even sure how to respond. You saw that with Comcast this week. They issued a very non-combative response, I think, trying not to inflame the situation. But surely behind the scenes, they're probably infuriated and confused and not really sure how to navigate this moment, because Brendan Carr has fully, every other agency, the FCC has been fully weaponized now for Donald Trump, and you're seeing him use it to punish Donald Trump's critics. And the only person who has not faced really any action from the FCC is Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is skating by, nothing to see there, I guess. There's no reason to investigate Rupert Murdoch. Fox is the only one that has been left unscathed. Every other organization, every other company has basically had an investigation launched against them. And that's obviously notable. I wonder if that's actually going to continue, given that Donald Trump has now sued the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch personally over that Jeffrey Epstein story. So we'll see if that stays. If that maybe, I could see, I guess, maybe Brendan Carr now, if Donald Trump gives the green light, maybe he does go after Rupert Murdoch. But up until now, Fox has been immune from all the FCC actions, which is notable and I think speaks to the political nature of these probes.
Yeah, I think the key there is that is the case for now. And what are we in, 6 months into this administration? We got a long time to go here, and it seems like this is a knife that is kept in the back pocket to be wielded at any time against Rupert. Like you said, he's already brought a lawsuit. We're only 6 months in, and we've already got a lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch and News Corporation, or Fox, News Corp. Yes, News Corp for the Journal. And so here we are. All right. Well, we will see where this goes, and I'm actually really curious too where Brendan Carr's investigation into NBC goes with this. What he manages to turn up there. I'm sure it will be very exciting. All right. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the new ad featuring Sydney Sweeney that is lighting up right-wing media in the culture wars. Oliver, this week, a huge culture war has exploded again, especially in right-wing media. This new Sydney Sweeney ad where she's wearing jeans. Have you seen this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes. The American Eagle ad.
So there's this ad at American Eagle, which sells jeans. It's in like every mall in America. I was wearing American Eagle in high school, by the way. So I'm kind of surprised a little bit. It's like Abercrombie and Fitch. These brands just sort of live on. They're like old mall haunts from the 90s, but they're cool again now. Anyways, So American
I don't know if they're
Eagle.
cool. I think that you just outgrew them, John, because I remember wearing them in high school as well, and then you just stopped wearing American Eagle at some
Wait,
point.
are you wearing American Eagle and not even telling me about it?
Not anymore. No, but when you're in high school, you wear American Eagle, and then you grow up and you become a more mature person, and you stop wearing American Eagle. But the high schoolers that I think they're still, I don't know, I guess I don't know any high schoolers, but I think they are still wearing American Eagle, clearly. They're still in business,
So yeah, I mean, apparently AE is still cool. I think Abercrombie is somehow cool again too, which is amazing. I gotta like pull up my old '90s wardrobe with the reindeer moose on it and start sporting those for the podcast.
Vintage Abercrombie.
So, anyways, so Sydney Sweeney is starring in this new ad campaign. She's wearing their jeans. She's wearing denim, like, head to toe, basically. And in this ad campaign, it says Sydney Sweeney has great genes. And it's supposed to be a double entendre, play on words here about, genes and genes like genetics, because she's beautiful. She's got this blonde hair and blue eyes as she stares into the camera. So so American Eagle posts this on social media. It sparked a little bit, I would say, sort of fringy backlash from what I can find here. Among some who are saying, look, this is like eugenics. You're basically suggesting here a sort of white supremacist view that she has superior genetics. And that's the play on words here between like blue jeans, denim, and jeans. A few outlets picked up on this early, a few days, at the beginning of this week, and sort of, expanded on this view of eugenics and why this is a troubling ad campaign. But it didn't stop there. And this is where things really exploded. Right-wing media, Fox News, The Blaze, The Daily Wire, there have been tons of stories. I mean, countless mentions on right-wing media about this campaign, calling it hysterics from the left, claiming that the left is now angry. The Chiron on Fox is the cancel culture mob is going ballistic over it. All caps, sirens. Like the Five is talking about it. It's on Outnumbered. Jesse Waters did a whole segment on it, and that's just like on one network. It is everywhere, right? And Tommy Lahren is talking about it on her show. And they're using this to suggest that, again, cancel culture is back. The liberals, are running in fear over white people being seen as beautiful, and really just making this into sort of like an absurd, performative backlash. What do you think about all of this?
I think a lot about it. A lot of thoughts. One, it just strikes me as like a typical culture war story that Fox and right-wing media love, which is that, yes, there was some, I think, videos on TikTok where people were making these arguments, which I, think are pretty absurd. Like, I think American Eagle is like one of the most inoffensive brands. I don't think they were sending coded Nazi signals. But there were some people who picked up on it on TikTok. There was like some MSNBC producer who wrote something. This was not like a major issue defining the quote left, right? Like, this was not what everyone was talking about in liberal America. This was a pretty small, select group of people kind of on the internet, and they made their points and whatever. But then what you see is all these big right-wing media companies take those, select few examples and suggest that everyone on the left is outraged over this thing. They're going ballistic. Cancel culture is out of control. And they blow this story, which probably no one would have seen or heard of, into this like national discourse about Sydney Sweeney and the jeans campaign, to the point where you did some research into this on Google. Like, the searches for Sydney Sweeney have surpassed Jeffrey Epstein this week. They've surpassed even Donald Trump. And so like, this has now become this huge, now it's actually a thing, right? Where people are actually debating this thing. It wasn't a thing, now it is a thing. And so right-wing media starts talking about it. And then you see news organizations like the Associated Press be like, okay, well, we should probably also publish a story on this controversy because it's, Sydney Sweeney, everyone's searching it. Everyone, these newsrooms love a good SEO story. And and they can run pictures of Sydney Sweeney, who certainly clicks very well. And it becomes this huge thing now. It's like an actual thing that people are talking about and debating. And it's sort of like ridiculous because this is not an actual story. And as you have, I think, people in Gaza, as we were talking about earlier in the show, dying of starvation, and you have Donald Trump again just continuing to shred democratic norms, and you have all these important stories that we should probably be focused on, the attention of the country is focused on Sydney Sweeney's, I almost said Abercrombie, American Eagle jeans campaign, which is just, I don't know. I think it's a reflection of how broken our information environment is. It's almost like in, a dog that sees a squirrel or something, and like everyone's attention has been diverted to this sideshow when it should probably be spent on some more weighty issues that are facing society.
Yeah, it has certainly become a spectacle. I agree with you. And I think stories like this are just very cheap and easy to produce. They require no effort, and they might, reap a significant traffic or viewership award. And like you said, when these segments are airing on television, and when they're airing on, I haven't seen CNN or MSNBC cover it once for their sakes. But when you see this thing airing on Fox, it's like 2/3 of the screen are images of Sydney Sweeney, with cleavage and hair and modeling. And it's like, okay, like we
They're
get
posting
it.
her pictures on Instagram now. It's like, okay, we see what's going on here, Fox News. Like, we clearly see what you're doing here.
It's like when Sean Hannity does his hard-hitting spring break reporting, and 2/3 of the screen is, spring breakers in bikinis bouncing around in the sunshine. It's like, okay.
Is that Sean Hannity? Wasn't that an O'Reilly thing?
Oh, I think O'Reilly pioneered it, but
yeah.
Didn't Sean has continued to do this.
I don't know. No, Jesse Waters. Jesse Waters
they shake
now
their
has
heads every year, and
response.
oh God, the youth, this is disgusting. This is what the liberals are doing.
Every wing of this story, or every party in this story, has a clear incentive, right? I think the TikTokers who started this, and some others who are, I guess, tweeting about it, they started it. They clearly were seeing Sydney Sweeney, and people click on Sydney Sweeney, and they were able to generate an audience there. I think obviously this is the perfect Fox News right-wing media story because they get to dunk on those crazy liberals or whatever. And so there's an incentive for them to do it. And then the news organizations, the serious news organizations like the AP that are covering this, they have an incentive because they want to get in on the traffic that's being poured into this. That people are, more people are Googling Sydney Sweeney than anyone else right now. So they want, when you Google Sydney Sweeney, to get that traffic. And it is now, I guess, to some extent, I don't want to say a legitimate story. It is a story that people are talking about. And so they publish stories. And so everyone sort of wins. I guess the people that lose is the people, the country, the public, because the discourse is about this non-story instead of talking about the important things that deserve attention. Like this week, for instance, like Laura Loomer is talking about how she is basically vetting for Donald Trump who gets to serve in the federal government in important positions. And that's a disturbing story. It should be alarming to everyone in the country that a self-described proud Islamophobe, right-wing, far-right activist is determining who gets to serve in government posts and represent the people, the public. That's not what people are talking about. They're talking about Sydney Sweeney and her jeans.
Right. And would you guess that the Trump administration has now weighed in on this issue too? They did.
Shocking.
The White House communications director, Stephen Chung, has now tweeted about this. Cancel culture run amok. This warped, moronic, and dense liberal thinking is a big reason why Americans voted the way they did in 2024. They're tired of this bullshit. This is the White House now weighing in on Sydney Sweeney wearing jeans. But this is, to your point, this now makes it a semi-legitimate news story. You now have White House officials going on the record getting involved in whether or not this ad campaign. And we should also say here that as of today, when we're taping this on Thursday, American Eagle has not said anything. There's no public statements that we can find. They're not talking about this. To a certain extent, all news is good news for your brand and your company and your attention. it's okay in the news media. It's great to have stories that are interesting, that are maybe less intense in a moment where we are seeing front page stories of children literally on the brink of and starving to death in a place like Gaza. But when it becomes something that's treated as a way to, attack others because of their viewpoints like this, and becomes a quote unquote legitimate story, I think you sort of reach a breaking point where I think our media ecosystem is a bit broken. The incentive structure around it is broken, where a story, I even hesitate to call it a story, a spectacle like this, a few TikTokers who I think were genuine, who genuinely feel that way, and that's great, that's fine, are then taken, and it's like every Fox segment they show like the same two TikTokers who either have like an LGBT flag, some sort of signaling in the background, so they can use this to talk about a woke mob. I think that's when you start to see that this is a tired routine, and it shows that our media landscape is really sort of broken. But Darcy, I'm looking forward to you breaking this story wide open with a huge scoop in the coming days.
Yeah, we'll get the huge scoop on this. I'm wondering if this is going to help American Eagle sell more jeans.
Oh yeah. We're talking about them. I didn't even know it still was around. So, I mean, mission accomplished from them as a marketing campaign, right?
I will say though, this is too very much like a typical story in the culture wars where, and Bill O'Reilly was, I think, the best at this, where it was like he would always find during Christmas time, like some small town that you've never heard of, decided to remove the Christmas tree or be more inclusive with, other traditions or whatever. And they would send, I think, Jesse Waters at the time out to the town and do a whole investigative piece about it. And it was a non-story that no one cared about. It did not represent what was actually happening across the country amongst, liberals or Democrats. But they would blow it up, and then it'd become an actual controversy where it would generate attention. And then once attention is generated, then other news organizations feel some obligation to cover that story. And to some extent, it's like they probably should, because when you Google these stories, you don't want the entire story, narrative to be from like the Daily Wire, right? You want some authoritative voice that's not agenda driven to be explaining what's happening here. But then it becomes a thing, and it's really just a distraction. And it's hard to say. It's like Donald Trump. Like, do you cover like his distractions because he is the president and he is saying often terrible things, or do you ignore it because it is meant to be a distraction and just let it go? And it's I don't know what the perfect. A lot of times it's unclear what the perfect answer is here. I think generally if there's no consequence, you probably shouldn't cover it. But in this case, it's like a supernova. Everyone's talking about it, so everyone's covering it.
Yeah, it's kind of the perfect story at the right time for right-wing media too, and for the Trump administration, which is looking for cover as a distraction away from the Epstein files saga that has been just fully consuming them. It's like a self-immolation at this point. And Fox has really done a lot to turn down the volume on Epstein, rarely mentioning it, this whole scandal on the air, even as sister publication Wall Street Journal breaks the story open with these connections. Then comes along Sydney Sweeney in jeans with cleavage, and the network is just absolutely thrilled, along with others, to run this as a story. All right, Oliver, amazing times that we're living in here. Can't wait to see where this goes from here. I'm actually very curious if Sydney or American Eagle speaks out about this, because
maybe you should go. You're going to be in New York City this weekend. Maybe we'll deploy you to the American Eagle. I think it's on Broadway, and you can go down there and get the real scoop.
We're going to do man on the street interviews like Water's World with the War on Christmas, because they put this ghastly menorah in the town next to the Christmas tree. It's going to be a lot of fun. Look for it. Look for it in the forthcoming status newsletter. Well, Oliver, it's been great catching up. I got to go catch a flight. I'll see you in a few hours. Everyone else, I hope you have a great weekend. Power Lines is presented by Status and hosted by Oliver Darcy and me, John Passantino. The show is produced by Matt Hevia and Antonio Enriquez in association with In the Arena Studios. Please like, share, and subscribe to Power Lines on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen, and watch full episodes and clips on our YouTube page at Status.